And we're off. Hi, everyone. It is the 23rd of May, 2024, episode 205 of my live chat. How are you doing? Fun little Thursday here for you. Lots of breaking news that we're going to react to start off today's program. First of all, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. That's number one. Number two, thanks to the folks who are here. And if you caught my live chat interview that I did with UFC bantamweight Corey Sandhagen, that's up for everyone here at youtube.com/Luke Thomas. I'm going to put that up on podcast over the weekend. I'll put this one up, obviously, tonight or first thing tomorrow morning. But thanks to everyone who caught that as well. What do we got today? Tons of different stuff to get to. Actually, a few different cool things or bigger stories anyway. People are killing the PFL. Let's talk about it. Let's see. As I mentioned, we'll get to the Garcia stuff, UFC 303 stuff. We've got Ilia Max stuff. We've got Jon Jones stuff. We've got any number of different things. Your party as much as it is mine. You'll go for the free questions for an hour from the thread that I put up yesterday. But if you want to get on the super chat for the paid portion, you may do that as well. Or you can just be here and take it all in for free. I really appreciate that just the same. So let's get going. We got a lot of stuff to get to, a lot of things to react to. Without further ado, let's get this party started. All right, very good. And of course, at the bottom, you can become a member of the channel. And if you do, you get the videos that I put nowhere else. They don't go any other place. They only go to members. Videos I put up one from, I was outside the Library of Congress. I would actually say I was sort of triangulated at a center position between the U.S. Capitol, the Library of Congress was over there, and then the Supreme Court as well. So people like to see DC landmarks, I guess, when I do these. So we'll do those continuously. And then, of course, you can, if you are a member, you can contribute to this live chat on the paid portion for free. All right, very good. And there's a poll up. You can take the poll about what's going to happen first. There's a series of fights that I list. I would love to see what you guys come up with there. All right, very good. As soon as this is over, your boy is going to work out in the front yard. I got my yard treated for mosquitoes. I've never done it before, right? In all my years, I'd never treated my yard for mosquitoes. The mosquitoes in the nation's capital are horrific. We got the tiger mosquitoes, the invasive species from Thailand. They got like white and black marks on them. Those things are, I mean, they'll chew you to pieces. Anyway, I had always like layer up in bug repellent to lift in my yard. Now I don't, and it's so nice. So I'm gonna hit the front yard gym when this is all over. All right, very good. Let me turn the banner off. Let's get to a few things that we have to get to off the top. There was a gentleman last week. I talked about this last week that he got on my case. I'm going to show you the tweet he sent me because I promised I said I would. I forgot to do it on MK, and I told him I would do it today. So I'm going to do it today very quickly. He was killing me on Twitter for this. Quote, he's quoting me. I said, we're talking about a guy who had a decent chin and was intent on wrestling him, give him a guy who was going to wrestle. This is why you need to pay attention to the full cards if you're going to have a show in the space. Waldo had been KO'd 3 times in boxing and shot 1 takedown in the UFC. He's talking about the Robelis Despain fight, where I had said that, they had set this guy up with a guy who was obviously going to wrestle him, and the point was Acosta had been knocked out several times in boxing and in the UFC. Obviously, the logic that he was a great opponent to not wrestle didn't end up being true, but I told him I would air his criticism and that tweet. I would show it on here. We did discuss it last week, but I wanted to make sure that I followed through and said and do what I said I was going to do. All right. So that's number one. The question was whether or not that was a fair thing to say, and obviously it was a little bit, it was definitely not true, except in the end it kind of was true because of the incentive structures in place, but I wanted to sort of put that out there. Okay, secondly, let's get to some of this breaking news, shall we? We shall. So if I pull this up on MMA Junkie, we can take a look at it here just a second. This is about UFC 303. Let me pull this news up if I can. I'm going to see if I can make this text a little bigger as well. And I'm trying not to have to watch these mother effing ads. All right, let me show this to you here. Oops, hang on. Let's do this. There we are. And I'll do it this way. Okay, so Khalil Rountree we knew was out because he had the contempt, or he popped positive Carlos Ulberg, fresh off his latest win at UFC St. Louis against Alonzo Menefield, is stepping in to face Jamal Hill at UFC 303. This, of course, will be June 29th. This is going to be, obviously, the co-main event to the Conor card. So now you've got at least 3 good fights on that card, and then, obviously, you've got Conor as well. The first to report it was the New Zealand Herald. It'll be the T-Mobile Arena. Since dropping his UFC debut, Ulberg has been on a roll, having they spelled roll wrong, having won 6 straight. He's coming off of a 12-second performance of the night knockout of Alonzo Menefield at UFC on ESPN 56. Meanwhile, Hill, of course, is looking to rebound after his loss. Here's my view. This is a perfectly fine fight, and I actually think it's quite winnable in either direction. I still was of the belief that it was, certainly to a degree brave of Jamal Hill to take a fight against Alex Pereira, and especially to do it on a quick turnaround, given the pretty significant Achilles injury he had suffered. And that was, of course, UFC 300. That was the main event for 300. I'm trying to get my numbers right. So I just don't know what version of Jamal Hill we got there. Wasn't enough on that night against that opponent, but some question still remains. This, to me, is a more doable fight, but also a very dangerous one as well. Ulberg can strike at range. He's very powerful. He is athletic. He takes risks in certain cases. It's a winnable fight for him. No doubt about it. And so for that reason, that's a very interesting fight. The only thing, as I said before, that gives me pause about this, the one thing that I'm kind of like, I don't know, is if you beat Jamal Hill, there's a decent chance you could be thrust into a title shot. Not a guarantee, especially if it's a boring or otherwise controversial performance. But if it's a good one and Jamal Hill, drops 2 in a row, there's a question about what kind of form he was in to take these fights. And it could propel, obviously, Ulberg to a title shot. And you might be like, oh, well, that's the whole point. That's great. My position is, I have seen his game develop, no doubt about it. I have seen him clean it up, no doubt about it. He is an exciting and talented contender, but I just don't know if he's really ready for that yet. I realize that light heavyweight is kind of wide open, and it's really hard to say, and who turns down a title shot. Again, I get that the incentive structures for him are also making this sort of a no-brainer call. But nevertheless, once you get to a certain point in that division, and yes, light heavyweight is not the strongest one, it can be very difficult to stay there if you're not ready. So this will either be a great moment of escalation or it'll be a huge reality check for him. I do worry that he kind of rushing into it, but here we are. They're there. That's part 1. Part 2, we should talk about. How about this Ryan Garcia news that has sort of been made public right before the podcast today. So if you didn't hear this, there's nothing really controversial about what happened. The testing of his B sample was to take place on May 22nd. This was, of course, the sample that found that there could have been nandrolone. They ultimately ruled out that there was none there from an exogenous source. And there was ostarine in his system. We've been over this. It's a SARM. And was this a function of contamination or not? We still don't really know what the truth is as it relates to contamination. The B sample was tested yesterday. The results are back. And of course, the B sample also showed the existence in his sample of ostarine. That is of no surprise. I've almost never seen the B sample come back and be in any way different than the A sample. That is just highly unusual. It would require, again, some kind of corruption in the test collection process in order for that to really exonerate him. And that just that's just not what happened here. At the same time, we have been over this extensively. Ostarine, it shows up all the time in very provable circumstances. And I don't know what evidence he's going to marshal, but it's kind of interesting that his team came out. I'm going to put it on the screen. It's going to cover my stupid face. Here you go. This is from his people. Quote, Ryan Garcia is committed to clean and fair competition and has never intentionally used any banned substance. Soon after he was notified after the positive test, Ryan voluntarily had his hair collected and shipped to Dr. Pascal Kintz, the foremost expert in toxicology and hair sample analysis. The results of this hair sample came back negative. This is consistent with contamination and demonstrably doesn't prove jack shit, that Ryan had not ingested ostarine over a period of time. The only way he could have had any advantage whatsoever in the ring. And then it goes on from there, it says like, hey, all these, by the way, they do point out he also tested negative multiple times leading up to the fight against Haney. All of these factors combined with his ultra low levels from samples taken on April 19th and 20th in the billionth of gram range. We'll have to see what that means later in terms of the actual specifics. Point to Ryan being a victim of supplement contamination, never receiving any performance-enhancing benefit from the microscopic amounts in his system. Oops, one more thing. We've been over this a few times. So there are basically two possibilities. One is that he took it, it shows up in the B sample, and there, sort of case closed. And you can say that that's Occam's razor if you want. The other one you can say is that he took something that was not properly vetted or somehow was contaminated otherwise, and he was unknowingly ingesting it, and it is showing up in a microscopic amount in his blood sample and not really providing any performance-enhancing benefit. Also, but I'm going to go back to this one more time. Do I have my book here? Oh, yes, I do. Give me 1 second. I got to show you this. Hang on. Let's take a look at this, boys and girls. I got sent this book, which I've been reading. Yeah. This is by a professor of exercise physiology at the University of Houston. Of course, has a PhD. Yeah. There we have it. This is a different book than one I've ever shown you. I just got sent this. I'm going to interview the author. I've been trying to explain this to people for a long time. They keep talking about this standard, the strict liability standard, where if it's in your body, then you're responsible for it. But we live in a world where that is no longer a really usable rubric or even a very enforceable guideline. If you can take water, drink water, which has been proven in certain cases to cause contamination, supplements over the counter. I don't know if he could have exercised more discretion, but we have to find out, but we'll see. But certainly that's possible. Even in medication that people have been prescribed that has been controlled through a pharmacy that had nothing to do with any kind of performance-enhancing effect. There was just contamination in the medicine. Then you live in a world where that is not possible. I keep trying to explain this to people. It's not an argument that you just have to let anything go and it's all good all the time. That's really not the argument. But the argument is this idea and the very in particular standards we put in place and the practices to enforce these standards, they don't comport with reality as we actually have it. The drugs are here. They're here and they're not going to go away. You cannot work any kind of system based on strict prohibition. It simply will not work. You have to have a more enlightened and frankly understandable policy that is much more flexible, particularly in the medicinal direction, which is more of a UFC conversation. But I keep bringing it up. It's going to be hilarious in 20 years if like the ideas that I've been espousing here become somewhat more mainstream. I don't know if that will happen at all. It could be the total opposite. I can't make a prediction about that. But it does seem to me that there's a growing body of, certainly on the academic side, of people realizing that all of the things we've been saying about anti-doping, basically, not all of them, many of them, both in principle and in practice, just simply aren't true. And it's time for a different way to examine these scenarios. All right. With that out of the way, let's get to your questions. We bring this back. I'm going to turn this off. Let's refresh the page. Okay. Let's get back to it, shall we? Here we are. Boom. We'll do it like this. Like that. Okay. Here we go. Thoughts on Gegard Mousasi saying out of all organizations he's fought for, PFL is the worst one. Yes, I did see this. This was on Ariel's show yesterday, if I recall correctly. I did see this clip. Let's look up all the organizations he's fought for, shall we? Let's do that. Let's have a gander at that so we can make a broader point about all of it. All right. Now, he could have just been speaking. I mean, obviously, he was speaking extemporaneously, but I mean, he could have been speaking with, purposeful exaggeration. So let me show this to you. Here we go. So we've got Bellator he's been in Bellator since 2017. Wow. That's crazy. UFC before that, then he was Strikeforce before that. Then he was Dream and Strikeforce. He did K1, which would be Dynamite, Strikeforce, Dream, M1, Hardcore Championship Fighting, Bodog Fight, which was, I don't even know if that was legal. Back to M1, CWFC, Pride, early days, Deep. Some of these are pretty good promotions. 2H2H, which was Too Hot to Handle, I think, which was a Dutch promotion. Deep, and then a bunch of just, whatever the fuck. The guy was fighting at a place called Fight Festival, Fight Gala, you name it. But I think what he is more referencing is like of the Prides and the Dreams and the Strike Forces and the Bellators, obviously UFC as well. Anything that was kind of like international class where you're fighting opponents with a name, this would be the worst of them. And I can't speak to his experiences, but I certainly understand and sympathize with his frustration. This is terrible PR for PFL. Excuse me. I obviously realize Bellator is still nominally around, but it's really a PFL issue. This is a terrible look for them. It's not just him. He's been frustrated. You have Douglas Lima, who's frustrated. Larissa Pacheco yesterday was on Twitter upset about it. Chris Cyborg has been bitter about it. Sabaho Masi can't get his bills paid on time. And I suspect that there's probably other ones as well. That these ones are hardly alone. And by the way, I've heard similar complaints from folks in one championship too. And again, it should be clear that like what we know about their contracts on paper, they've got the worst ones. But Gegard didn't fight for one. Terrible look for them, which is relatively obvious. But the part that really gets me, that I'm just sort of trying to connect the dots on, I want to show you guys something that I saw. I've just been having this little theory about this. This is, to me, emblematic of like everything I just don't understand what the fuck they're doing. So let me see if I can find something here. I can show you this. Let's see if I can find it. Nah. Let me dig this up. This is kind of important. So let's see. PFL. I want to show you this because I feel like it connects exactly to the issue that I'm having with them. All right, here we go. This is a perfect example. So let me pull this up over here, and I'm going to paste it. I want you to take a look at this. All right, I want you to take a look at this. Okay, let's put this on the screen for you. Now, this tweet has nothing to do with Gegard Mousasi, but I want you to look at these graphics here. This one on the left is for the main card. This one on the right is for the preliminary card. Now, to be clear, there are some, I'm going to come back to it. There's some great fights on these cards. This is not a comment that they don't have anything good on here. That's not at all what I'm saying to you, but look at this one more time if you can. What is the very biggest graphic on either of these two different graphics? What's the biggest thing you see on either of them? And the answer is it's the PFL logo. Every face is barely recognizable. On the preliminary card, you could honestly get half of these wrong and nobody could even tell the difference. They are super minimized. It's just a wall of text. It's a wall of headshots that are, absolutely indiscernible, with a giant PFL logo at the top. The main card is a little bit less so because it's only 4 fights, but it's not like these stand out either. All of these look the same. All of the fights on the main card have the exact same size. The only difference being the amount of text for the last name, but the headshot size are the same. The sort of like the blue background there is for the red card. It's a red corner, blue corner. These little blocks are all the same. Main card is not much bigger. The PFL thing is really kind of the biggest one. Main card is longer, but PFL is a little bit bigger in text itself. I bring this all up to say, it seems to me that they think of their product as like their Costco or something. Like, the way we're going to win is with bulk. We're just going to ship a ton of stuff. We're going to make this a volume play. We're going to be on X number of weeks. I heard Don Davis say that they want to have something like 40 plus events by 2026. This is a volume play. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, a volume play of people that nobody knows, with stories you're not really telling. By the way, with a back end either on PFL's YouTube channel or Bellator's YouTube channel or on Max. You can't watch any of the Bellator fights, by the way. Just want to put that out there. If you miss them live, there's no way to watch them. Certainly not in the United States. They seem to think that like their road to salvation is just bulk. Nameless situations, X versus Y, A versus B, 1 versus 2. I don't even mean ranking, just 0 and 1, just digits in code. And we're just going to ship a bunch of this at you, and that is ultimately going to be the thing that puts us over the hump. And you're like, are you out of your fucking mind? Like, that's the play? I'm not, like, they have a choice here. They could go in a place where they try to feature names that are more familiar to fans, or in some ways just have a higher Q rating. And you could even argue, well, listen, Mousasi is older. Maybe he doesn't occupy that role anymore, and PFL wants to move on from him. I don't think that's necessarily a bad call for PFL. If you like, there is some case to be in the Mousasi business, but there's also one that makes sense for them to not be. But to not cut him is just weird to begin with if you're going to keep him on the shelf this long. It's like it's unethical to keep him on the shelf this long without paying him. Just matter of fact, he can't go and work anywhere else. If you're not going to use him, you have to let him go. But what does it say that you're benching people who are expensive, who have names, for situations with people who are certainly much more affordable, who do nothing to move the needle in terms of gaining the ground you need to make money on pay-per-view? It boggles my mind. It boggles my mind that like they think just shoveling sand and like, look at all the sand we have. Every grain is the same as the other grain, more or less. Some of it looks a little prettier than others. We're just going to shovel this constantly. Like that's the play. You can't fucking believe it. Like you cannot believe that that is the move. Benching Chris Cyborg, benching Douglas Lima, benching Gegard Mousasi, which again, if you don't want to be in business with them, I'm not saying I don't necessarily, or any one of them or all of them or whatever. I can understand not necessarily wanting to be in individual business with some of those players. I understand that. But you're keeping them there and not paying them. It's just matter-of-factly unethical. And you're benching people with a name for people that the casual MMA fan, which I don't even know if there is such a thing, but let's just say it, you're trying to get UFC audiences to also watch your MMA, and you're doing it with a wall of text that nobody knows jack shit about. Again, the average fan, not the Clue plugged-in fan, with guys and headshots that one looks no more important than the other. The only thing you can read from all of this is the PFL header at the top. And obviously, you know, a few other things along the way. But that is how they position their product. It is fucking shocking. It is shocking. And if anybody can look at this while they're benching people with names and then think like that what they're doing currently as it's constructed, that is a path to financial salvation. I mean, I don't know what the fuck you're looking at. I don't know what they're looking at. I don't know what the fuck they're doing, I guess is the way I'd like to say it. I don't know what the fuck they are doing. It does not make even the slightest degree of sense. So, you know, I have seen competitors to the UFC give the UFC a run for their money. I see nothing with them that makes me indicate that they can do that at all. If they think the play is like bulk. Oh, y'all are fucked with that attitude. Super fucked. Unless you want to change the business model completely, in which case, you know, we can have a different conversation. But okay. Week 2, this person writes, of asking this question, a lot of your technical difficulties videos, like how Islam Makhachev outclassed Charles Oliveira, have been removed from your YouTube channel. I just took them down temporarily, but yes, only one is available as a member. That is true, and only a couple are available on your Patreon. Also true. Can you bring all of them back somewhere where they can stay up? I really enjoy them. Yes, I absolutely can. And I am working on that. I know it sounds like, I know people think that like me and Brian, it's not really about MK, but like when we're not recording, we're just sitting on our asses, like not doing anything. And I'm like, dude, I'm in meetings all the fucking time, either for MK or for shit that I'm planning for myself. So we have to figure this out, right? Because it's fun to do boxing breakdowns, and they do actually fairly well for me. But MMA is the ones I want to pay more attention to, and I think the audience would really get a kick out of, and those do really well for me as well. But the UFC, in my personal opinion, when it comes to the YouTube copyright service, I think that they make claims on content that they are not in any way right to do so. But I can't control the copyright system. There are some things I can do that we're working through, but in general, I don't think that what they're claiming is accurate. However, I'm at the mercy of what the system does and does not allow for. So give me just maybe like I'd say probably 2 more weeks to get this completely situated, but I want to have a repository for everything that is fully accessible in every kind of way. I realize it is clearly a need. There's clearly a market for it, and I want to deliver that. I feel like it's some of the content that kind of separates me from some other folks, so I definitely want to lean into that if I can. Give me a little bit of time to get through this minefield a little bit. It creates a difficult problem. It's like, it's kind of funny. Like I put out this video and I didn't even mention this on the video that I put out, which was the one I talked about previously. It's just for members. And I was like trying to explain, like if you notice, like I did a submission radio interview. It was almost entirely about boxing. Obviously, MK's been covering boxing for a while. Ariel has really leaned into it. And there's like a lot more you're beginning to see bleed over. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But one thing I didn't even mention is, like, for example, if we go to the Gervonta Davis fight, like they're just like the media people there, like the PR folks, they're going to bring us everybody. They're going to bring us Tank Davis. They're going to bring us David Benavidez. They're going to bring us Frank Martin and Vosdick and everybody else. They're going to bring us everybody. And so it makes, like, there's a high degree of value if you can go in and all these people come to your booth. They make it worth your while to go. UFC simply, they might do radio rows like 1 or 2 times a year at most, but in general, they simply do not, and they're not going to facilitate that. And folks are going to say, "Oh, well, it's your job. Go do it." Yeah, fine, but like again, forced to spend money to travel, forced to pick where the bang for the buck is. It's not a very difficult call. It's not that we don't want to go. It's just that if we're going to get served the biggest star in boxing without having to beg for it, and then hope that it happens, versus like there's no assistance at all on getting any kind of these guys. Like, what are you going to do? You know what I mean? So it's not really asking. It's not really addressing what you're asking here, but I'm just sort of pointing it out. Look, I know you said that inevitably PFL in 1 will fall as a consequence of the antitrust buyout. Yes. My question is, do you think the format 1 uses by having multiple disciplines on each card will help it survive longer than PFL? I personally love watching 1 more than any promotion right now. So let's just sort of be clear. Does PFL have good fighters? Yes. Do those fighters tend to perform at high levels and on occasion, certainly like any other place, put on good fights? Absolutely. You can watch PFL and you can watch high-level guys and you can watch good fights. It would be a flat lie to say that that's not true. That has nothing to do with whether or not that product makes money, but it can deliver on those expectations. And I've said this repeatedly on this live chat. I think 1's product is one of the best alternatives to the UFC I've ever seen. For any number, or not ever seen, but currently among the field of choices that you have as a combat sports fan, the 1 choice to me seems like a pretty good one. What I would say though is what you're describing is the fact that they have like the submission grappling, and then they've got the 4-ounce Muay Thai, and then they've got regular kickboxing, and they've got titles and all this different stuff. They've got a really different rule set and different judging system. They've got a real alternative to the product, and I fully agree with that. Every time I watch them, like this is a great. Not every part of it I love. Like when they do like heavyweight MMA fighting in a ring, I don't know how great I like that, but in general, their ability to play with the rules because they're not constrained by United States athletic commissions. Again, there's, I realize that they're in Colorado, but you get the idea. In general, they can come up with their own rule set. It makes them a great alternative, but they have been up to this point doing all of this and hemorrhaging money. I mean, absolutely hemorrhaging money like there's no tomorrow. Now they are engaged in a process to take away the financial transparency of what they do. But up to this point, they have lost hundreds of millions of dollars. They've never turned a profit, not once. They have claimed that they're going to turn a profit in 2 years, 4 years, 6 years. It doesn't happen. I don't know why anything would change just by diversifying what kind of thing you do. It makes the product more dynamic, but I don't know if it ultimately changes their fortunes in terms of how you make money in the combat sports space. And they don't make money in the combat sports space. Or I should say, at a bare minimum, the best available evidence indicates that not only do they not make money, they hemorrhage that shit like, make some metaphor about somebody bleeding to death. I mean, it is quite stark. The reporting of Anton Tabuena and then John Nash has been very, very clear about this. Anton Tabuena in particular, they're absolutely way in over their heads in debt. So I don't think it's any kind of road to salvation. It seems like there might be some kind of way to construct the product to get rights fees to pay for a lot and get a number of broadcast deals that can lead to a fair degree of revenue generation. But if that was a path that was doable, PFL probably would have been there by now, although maybe they'll get bailed out by some kind of Saudi Saudi investment. But the real money is basically UFC obviously is probably the exception, but of course they have all the best fighters, many of the best fighters. But in general, it's going to be pay-per-view for these folks, or the rights fee system has to change dramatically. But no, I don't think it will save them. None of these things can save them. The only thing that can save them is having access to premier talent, which they don't, with a couple exceptions here or there. Luke, what do you think is the ideal number of fights per year for a fighter? Well, it depends. It depends. This will depend on who you are as a person, what style you have, and where you are in your professional journey. So I have seen amateur fighters who, I mean, I've seen them well above this, but let's talk about ones who ended up being really good. I've seen amateur fighters, take 5-6 fights in a calendar year. Again, I've seen more than that, but again, as an example, if you're an amateur fighter and depending on your division, depending on your skill set, let's say you have a D1 background, blah, 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 it could actually be very beneficial for you to take that many fights. Then when you get to low-level regional fights, you can still be relatively active, and as many as 6 again, but I would say probably close to the 4-fight range. Although, again, circumstances will depend. Hey, we need you last minute. This is a guy you already beat before, blah, blah, blah. There's a range here. But I would say by the time you get to like ranked UFC good, 3 to 4 on the high end, because there's so much mileage. But 3 tends to be a bit of a sweet spot. Once every 4 months is a really good way to do that, because it gives you up to a 10 to 12 week camp plus some time off, and you can kind of stay in rotation. Again, there are going to be different people under different circumstances who might be a little bit less if they have a very labor intensive or highly damaging style. There's going to be people who are going to need a little bit more time between fights when they start out. But the idea is sort of, you can take a bunch when you first start out, and it's going to narrow down and then kind of sort of like level out to about 3 at the professionally ranked level. And most of those guys and ladies don't get that. They typically get closer to 2 and some change on average. But 3, and again, sometimes 4 even at the elite level. And I've got, I know what you guys are going to say. Well, I've seen 5 at the elite level in a year. Again, there's going to be people who could pull that off, but 3 seems to be a little bit more of a sweet spot. Hey, Luke, if they do end up fighting, which I guess they're probably not gonna, but let's say, how would you see a 5-round fight between Jones and Aspinall? Well, let's back up a step here. There has been one thing that Jones has said throughout this process. Like, he said a bunch of crazy nonsense, but there's been one thing he said that does deserve to be taken very seriously by people, especially his detractors, which is when he says, hey, I've seen a lot of guys look like they were supposed to be the guy to beat me. And whether it was in a fight with him or even before they could get there, they just come completely unglued in the process. And then you realize, oh, this dude was not that guy at all. That has happened. I have seen that over the course of his career. People will, erect some kind of figure as like, oh, that's the one. That's that guy right there is going to be the one to take Jones down and beat him up, and he's not going to be able to do anything. And it just never really materialized. And then you have to go back and you have to re-rank them, or at least reevaluate them and what kind of place they hold and what kind of threat they actually were and what success we can say they're actually entitled to. That's a true thing. He's right about that. So the argument for Jones defending his title, partly it's about Tom Aspinall specifically because it appears like he has the goods. The other part of it, though, just to be very clear about this, is that he's the champion. An interim title is being defended for a fight against a guy in Stipe who we all admire and respect, but in the meritocratic way of looking at it, simply does not deserve this fight at all, especially when there's an interim title floating around. So, like, even if Blades were to win it, I realize that fight is not nearly as sexy. And of course, if Blades does win, it blows up a lot of the antagonism that's going John's way. I certainly understand that, but I would still want him to defend that, because that's how a division, it's bad for the division, it's bad for the sport for this shit to be happening concurrently and never intersecting between title and interim. And I bring this all up to say, if, like, do we know for a fact that Tom Aspinall is that guy? We simply don't. We don't know how he looks deep into the 3rd round, and I should say more importantly in the UFC, what it would look like for him, into the 4th and 5th. It's just, we have, as a big heavyweight like that, athletic, doesn't have experience being taken that deep there. Jon's got a shit ton of experience with that. So it's purely guesswork. It's just conjecture. There really is no way to know. But that's why we want to see the fight. Like, that's why it's intriguing. A young guy, 30, athletic as shit. I know he was doing some training with Eric Nixick. I was talking to Eric Nixick about this. We were texting, and he was telling me, I was like, well, what's it like? Like, how quick is he? He's like, dude, he moves like this is what he told me. He's like, he moves like a featherweight. He said he was just mind-blowingly quick for a heavyweight. Like, you just couldn't believe it. And so, it looks like he's got the goods. He's running through everyone, but we simply don't know. And, Jon fighting Stipe doesn't really tell us much either, because I feel like Stipe has certainly passed it too. And so if Jon beats him, what does that really mean? Gon was supposed to be a good challenge, but his grappling was just so poor. It's really hard to take that seriously. But, what does it look like? I don't know. I mean, if you're asking me to guess without enough information, I think that Aspinall probably gives him some serious issues. I think that Aspinall should get through Curtis Blaydes, but that's no guarantee. Curtis is also tough as shit, but he should be able to. I just feel like with his speed and his control, his well-rounded game, his ability to get in and out, he can cover distance while keeping his power. He can stay rooted. His balance is good. I mean, there's just so much about him that's good, but he is untested in durations where you can get a much better look against the kind of opposition that can bring that about. And there's no other Blaydes might end up being this, so we'll have to see. But it's not like there's a Cormier or, like what Jon had to go through at light heavyweight, where there was like a Cormier and there was a Gustafsson, guys who like were real tests for anyone else in that division. And then at least in some of those fights for Jon. We'll see if Blaydes is that guy. He may not be that guy either, And of course, the flip side to all of this is, hey, we don't know if Tom is the guy, but let's say he goes in there and fights Blaydes and just absolutely fucking destroys him. That will really, I think, up the pressure on Jon. I think in the end, based on what he's telling us, then we should probably take him at his word that he will just be gone. I don't know. But Jon's got real experiential advantages on him. Tom's got real youth and, I think, at this stage, athletic advantages on him. How those two intersect, this is why they need to fight. This is why they need to fight. We'll see. All right. What did you make of Mick Maynard's recent interview? I did see this, where he said the UFC prioritizes finishes over anything when it comes to scouting talent. Will we see more regional fighters intentionally can crush to con the UFC into a contract? Well, there's already a fair amount of that goes on, if I can be honest with you. Like, if you're a regional level, I cannot. If you've been watching this live chat for some time, you know what I'm about to say sounds like the biggest broken record, but you really need to go see regional MMA, because what you're going to end up seeing is not just who in your community fights and who's good and what teams and blah, 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 and who's the next big up-and-comer. You're going to see who the promoter on a regional level tends to favor. And they do favor people. It is absolutely 1,000,000,000% inevitable. It is what happens every single time. There's either going to be a team or a guy or a lady or whoever, some kind of circumstance that they're going to tend to favor. And you're going to get a good look at that. So this already happens on the regional scene, no doubt about it. I am less concerned about that, although that could be a problem too. And there is some wisdom to it. There is some wisdom to it. So, like, he had argued, if you can't finish people on the regional scene, what makes you think you can finish people up here? And I think that there's a fair amount of truth to that. I mean, obviously, the one argument against that would be guys are going to get better as they go along, and they could mature later, and then that really begins to build up their game in unique ways. And there were people who didn't necessarily have a ton of finishes on the regional scene that ended up actually getting more later in their career. That happens too. But I certainly understand that, like, hey, if you can't beat guys and put them away at CFFC, you're going to have a hard time at UFC. Fair enough. However, what I would also argue is that's not a claim for saying that the people signed to you are maximally the best. Because you can get people who can fucking wallop fighters on the regional scene who are not that good, and they may just be, people who can do the knockout game at the regional level who cannot do it at the national level or international level at all. Their game completely falls apart. We've seen many of them on the Contender Series. Guys who go in there, you got to win by knockout, and they win by knockout, and then they fight someone who can wrestle, and they get completely crushed. Like, we've seen this a million times. So I don't think what he's saying is, oh, well, we don't care if you're the best. We only care if you can finish people. I suspect that, like anything, the equation is a little bit complicated, but they're trying to emphasize the ability to put people away as something of a condition for employment. I tend to think this is more of just trying to pressure the fighters into. There's many ways in which they do this, with bonuses, with withholding their pay, and it's a win and bonus system, or a show and win system. This is one of many levers that they have, both in terms of who they recruit, what kind of pressure they put on them to really kind of go for it as best they can. And I think in some ways, many of you probably might think that is good. In some ways, it probably is good for them to incentivize finishing. I don't think there's any problem with that. But in terms of who they sign, they're going to leave people like a Brendan Loughnane, who ended up, by the way, having other finishes after that fight was over, who they're going to pass on because he decided to go for a takedown at the end of the third round. This guy could easily compete with, certainly when he was at his best, can compete with people in the UFC, and they just passed on him because they weren't looking for someone in his particular case who was maximally the best. They wanted someone who was maybe not necessarily as good, but had a little bit more of a gung-ho attitude. You should understand that. You should understand, like, that's what they're going for. They want the best, of course, but what they also want is, if you're not going, even if you are the best, they want you to go for the finish. And if you're not going to be the very, very best, but you can, play in that deep end of the pool, they want you to be a guy who is bite down on the mouthpiece and go. That they really, really kind of value that. So that's going to affect how they deliver the product, who they recruit to deliver the product, and what the product looks like. All right, let's see. What is your stance on gentle parenting? How do you discipline your Tukester asking for a new parent? Well, let me tell you something. Parenthood is hard as shit. Very, very difficult. I have found there are no easy answers. It is not easy. Things that you would think might be obvious are not obvious at all. I do not hit my daughter. I refuse to. I just cannot, after what happened to me, I just cannot do it. And it doesn't work anyway. It totally backfires. Especially later in life, it builds resentment. You have to find ways to emotionally understand what they're going through when they're rejecting what you want them to do. And a lot of times, the reason why it's easier to just hit a child is because it just it's such a damaging force that everything else succumbs to it, rather than trying to engage with why your child is frustrated and then working through the problem a little bit more slowly and carefully. So hitting them, it gets them to, often in the short run, it might get them to stop and then live in fear of you, creates problems much later on down the line. And you can create, and by the way, you can create all other problems. They do poor, the studies show kids who get hit do poorer in school. They do poorer with socialization, any number of different problems that they have. And then, to say nothing of what happens when they have kids at times. You have to just slowly work through it. I mean, there are things that we do from a disciplining standpoint. We do timeouts. I try not to yell. That I cannot claim that I've got a perfect record on that. I certainly do not. It can be frustrating. You lose your temper at times. But you have to understand that a lot of times kids can be confused or not understand boundaries or can be frustrated, and it can appear like disobedience. And it's not necessarily disobedience as you understand it, a rejection of your authority. They have to be made to understand what it means to respect you. They have to understand what it means that, like, there have to be consequences, obviously, for bad behavior, but you have to construct those carefully. And I have found that so far, there has been no need whatsoever for me to hit my daughter. Just absolutely zero. There's not many parenting decisions that you can make, especially as a relatively newish parent, where you're like, oh, this is clearly a good call. That one is a good call. Is just not doing it. I said this before. Everyone who, like, it's so fucking easy. It's so easy to be like, I'm going to turn on Bluey. Great show, by the way, for kids. I'm going to turn on Bluey and just leave her there, for 2 hours, let her watch, and then I'll just go and fuck around and do whatever I want to do. Like, I can control her this way, but is this really good for her? It's not. Like, doing the work of parenting is like, you actually have to get in there and do it. And it is hard. It requires of you sacrifice and time and patience, but it can be done. It's just how much it means to you. All right. Luke, you've mentioned a couple of times how Holloway's team thinks that Topuria is a blown-up bantamweight. That's what they told me. I found that a little confusing. Okay. Did they mean in terms of stature and reach? It was confirmed by the California Commission that he walked into the cage against Volkanovski at over 167. I find it hard to believe he could ever make a bantamweight. I don't think that they necessarily are suggesting he's exactly a natural bantamweight. I think I have to go back. This was from the Ivan Flores interview. And I think what he means is if you just look at his frame compared to Max, it definitely looks like they're in different weight classes. And I know what you might say, well, weren't, the same kind of argument against Volkanovski. First of all, there's truth to that. I don't think Volkanovski is a natural bantamweight either, but there is a size frame discrepancy between them. That's first. And the second part is that I would not, yes, in terms of a weight and sort of, he's sort of dense with muscle. Topuria is, but he doesn't, and obviously his power carries up to 155, but he doesn't have that, like Sean O'Malley, also very, very, very lean. Like look at Aljo too. These are guys who at 135 now, 145. Obviously, 145 is going to be bigger, but like even at 135, these are guys that have just naturally bigger frames, fair amount of musculature themselves. I think they're just sort of saying like he just looks a little too, not a little too, but a little diminutive in size. I'd have to really follow up with them to get a very clear sense of what they mean. But Max is a 45er who can go and be just as big in terms of frame as a 55er, whereas Topuria's power carries to 55, but he doesn't have a 55er's frame. So maybe the idea that he's a bantamweight that's blown up is a little bit overstated, but I know what they mean. Max is this tweener between featherweight and lightweight. Topuria can play that game because of his natural athletic gifts, but he is not really suited for that. Again, Mike Chandler walks around at 190 at 55, 190 plus. If Topuria is closer to probably, 175, maybe even 180 at worst, when he's not in camp. And even that is on the high end. He's probably closer to the 175, 170-ish range. So it's more about like the difference between he and Max rather than absolutely he's more tied to a 135-pound weight class as an appropriate fit. That's sort of my read on it. Oh, man, I don't know how to answer this one. Where does Khabib go with his current rumored debt as well as Eagle FC? Well, Eagle FC I think it's fucking dead. I understand there hasn't been an event there due to the conflict going on, but they could still host events elsewhere. I don't think that's the issue. I think that they ran out of money from investors, and I don't think Khabib wants to put in his own. Don't quote me on that. I've only had sort of like soft conversations. I think Chael has talked a little bit about this publicly. But dude, like if you're trying to get Eagle FC going, I mean, everyone look around. Like something happened where like fighters began to like leave UFC and they would have good relationships. And like I know there's like there's like the Game Bread thing, and then like A1 Combat for Uriah, and I know Anthony Pettis has his own series. But I have to tell you, like the biggest story, it was widely understood 10 years ago that you should not promote MMA unless like one of two things happens. One, you can be a regional promoter, and like in that regional space, you can carve out a little bit of an identity to make a little bit of money by being valuable. Your guys go to UFC or whoever the top promotions, and you've kind of got this little geographic network on lock. You're not going to make a ton of money doing that, but you could potentially make some. That model doesn't work for everyone, but it can work for a few people in certain situations. That's one. The other one was to either work for the UFC or in some kind of way that is really not in, or not in their way. Like you work for some kind of like, I don't know, major international promotion, but that, UFC is not like KSW or something. But there was really no other way, again, short of working for the UFC. That's really kind of it, because it was well understood. Like, promoting is very difficult to make money in. Super, 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 super difficult. Like, watching all these fighters get into promoting, I'm like, you guys didn't make a lot of money to begin with, and now you're just going to piss it away. I mean, I realize that in certain cases, they've got a lot of investor money. My understanding is Eagle FC is one of them. But once that dries up, you're going to pump your own money in? No. Terrible idea. Terrible idea. Yeah, no, fuck that. That's the answer to that. I guarantee you that they never made a dime off of that. In terms of, they might have gotten a lot of investment and potentially some kind of lifeline I don't know about, but like, there was some of those shows were just in like a warehouse in Miami. I know there were some other ones that were in more appropriate venues back in Russia or whatever, but that's a money losing venture. I'm not even saying that in an insulting way. Like, that's just the reality of promoting. It's very, very difficult to do. This is why, PFL just showing these like giant walls of text. I'm like, dude, who the fuck is this for? Who is the fucking customer for that? My God, how do we not know this already? Jesus Christ. All right. Which sport lends itself to a longer career, boxing or MMA, and why? Definitely going to be boxing, but it shouldn't necessarily be that way. For starters, you're going to start younger. There's a whole amateur system. Now, you can sort of say, well, maybe the amateur system for MMA is like collegiate or scholastic wrestling. Okay, there's some comparisons there. But in general, if we're talking just MMA to boxing, you're going to start much younger. So that alone is just going to give you more life as a competitor. If you mention the pro ranks, you're going to get washed out pretty quickly in a lot of different ways from both of them. So, in some sense, there isn't necessarily a huge difference. But understand something, like, if there's one thing I have learned talking to managers over the years, a lot of their guys don't end up going through with this, but this is what they state as their preference, that the MMA training is so hard and the sport is so brutal that they want to get a few big $1 million paydays and then just call it a day and go do something else with their money. Like, they're looking to get out. You know what I mean? Look at what Cejudo did at the peak of his powers. And I never realized that was a bit of a fumble, but like, I understood that at the time a little bit. I didn't think the strategy would work, but I understood why he was like, time out on all this. Time out. I do get that. With boxing, the training is less injury prone. The fights and the sparring can obviously totally change your life and end it. We all know the stories there. But because of at least at the premier end, the ability to earn money is so unique in combat sports and so high. This is why a lot of guys want to look and hang on just a little bit longer than they have to, or would otherwise prefer to. Now, of course, there's going to be exceptions the other way as well, right? Where guys are hanging on in MMA. I don't think the difference once you start as a pro is necessarily all that big. In fact, in the MMA sense, because of the heavyweights, you tend to see them go a little bit. Obviously, guys age out in boxing in differently than they would at bantamweight in boxing. But you're starting to see several guys at or above 40 still competing. I mean, dude, Jon Jones wants to fight a guy who's going to be 40 fucking 2. You know what I mean? There's not a full lot. I mean, obviously, George Foreman coming back was a big thing, but you get the idea. There's just not a lot of that. Certainly not in a contemporary sense. But the life you can have as a competitor because of the amateur system at a bare minimum is just going to extend that to a very long degree. Did you see John's response on Instagram to your recent post about his DMs? I did. I saw it this morning. He doubles down on being rich, still with his wife, and laying pipe every night. Yes. Seems like he continues to minimize his legal issues. His domestic violence charge wasn't even 3 years ago, not 4 or 5 like he says. And he acts like it's no big deal. Yeah, why wouldn't he? His 30s aren't going much better, and he isn't actively winning fights to dominate the narrative. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what to say anymore. I did see what he wrote. Aren't you guys? I know this is how I feel about it. I'm just like tired of the whole thing. Like, one way or the other. One way or the other. Here's what I'll say. I'm just ready for it to be over. You know what I mean? Like, one way or the other. Either he fights Stipe and rides off into the sunset and then we can just be fucking done with it. Or he'll fight Stipe, which I don't want him to do. I suspect he'll win. God, can you imagine if he fucking loses and they have to do a rematch? I might die. But assuming that he wins, and then he fights Tom Aspinall, in which case, or the winner of Aspinall and Blades, I should say. Let's be very careful about that. And then that brings some kind of order and end to it. But either way, I'm ready for it to be over. I think that Jon, listen, anybody who sits in front of a microphone, it's very, very easy. And I've done it before incorrectly, really about lecturing the rest of the world, in particular the faults of individual people. We should always be mindful of our own and all of the shortcomings that we have. I think sometimes I'm not aware of them, and then sometimes I'm sort of acutely aware of them. But I think it's also fair to say that, he's got a number of what appear to be completely unaddressed issues, that the reason why they keep materializing themselves deep into his 30s is because they go unaddressed. It's true he has amassed extraordinary professional record and probably some significant wealth for himself and his family, which is great. He's earned it. In fact, remember when he wanted Deontay Wilder money? If anything, he's been underpaid, and I don't mind saying that. That's just the reality. At the same time, he's got a lot of problems that I guess he thinks aren't very real or otherwise doesn't want to do anything about. And so if that's the case, then he will continue to have those. And I don't wish that upon him. I genuinely don't. I don't wish it upon him, because there tends to be the effect of having loved ones who get also pulled into those problems. But I can't even get up here anymore and be like, that Jon Jones. I mean, it's like, how much fire and brimstone can you have before you're just like resigned to the shitty fate that we're in? So he'll look a lot better if Tom loses and, him and Stipe put on a great fight. I think, that's one possibility that we should definitely not poo-poo. That's a real thing that could happen. I don't think it's the likeliest one, but it definitely could. But I'm just ready for it all to be over, because it's still a total mismanagement of the elite side of the. I mean, it's just like if these two guys, if Jon and Stipe were trying to do this in a way where they were at odds with the UFC, I mean, the fans are kind of already killing him, but they would be like really killing him. And the only difference is that like the promoter's in on it. So you're just like, well, what the fuck are we going to do now? I'm just ready for it to be over. I'm ready for it to be over. He's got bigger issues to deal with than Stipe or Tom Aspinall, and I hope that he gets an opportunity to do that. Okay, there's some good ones here. Some of these are a little bit of a repeat. Let's see. Okay. Kind of did this one already. Let me skip that one. Here, I'll go to this one. Luke, in 2024, would you be more excited for Apache Mix versus O'Malley champ matchup, or seeing Tatiana finally fight for the belt after all she's worked for? I mean, I would be happy about either of them. Probably more Tatiana, especially after Apache's last performance, which I did not feel like. There was one guy who ran over the Strikeforce Bantamweight tournament, and it was him. And when I say ran over it, you guys saw it too. He fucking ran over those dudes. The only one who was able to make it out into a decision was Horiguchi, and he got completely controlled in the process, like completely out-grappled. Magomedov got put to sleep the first time, and then you saw what he did to Rafael Stotts, and then he beat Sergio Pettis as well. Like the dude was just crushing people. And then he showed up against Magomedov the second time here and looked not like that guy. Now, who knows what the reasons are. Magomedov got better. That's one big one. So shouts to him. He did a really good job. But Patchy's, what I had said before that fight based on his run through the tournament was that, like, this is the most dominant guy who's a weight class champion outside of the UFC. And I think after that, we have to dial that back. Now I think that that's a much more wide open thing. Malikin probably moves very clearly into that number one role. So let's see what else he can do before we get too hyped on that, given the most recent performance. But the Suarez one, she's also been just like completely denied by unfortunate circumstances. So I would love to see her get a crack. If Chimaev loses to Whitaker, do you think he goes on to ever win a UFC title? Probably not. Probably not. Not a guarantee, but probably not. Let's see. Interesting question, but we're kind of low on time for it. What do you attribute To what do you attribute the fact that your channel has more subscribers than MK's, and do you have any mixed feelings about this? Not really. First of all, like as it stands today, I put up more content than the MK channel. That's the first thing I'd say. Second of all, you have to understand how MK was created and then like what each person brought to the table there a little bit. So MK had a few different plays it was going for, but as a distribution channel, it was a YouTube play, obviously. That play I wrote the book for. I mean, obviously there was a lot of input in a lot of different directions. Don't misunderstand me, but like literally look, like at first I took my live chat off this channel and I put it there. Literally, I did that. I stopped doing post-fight shows here and started doing them there. I left this site dormant, or this channel dormant, for like almost a year at one point. And there's a lot of like breaking news stuff. I stopped doing it there and stopped doing it here and did it over there. Like I literally just took things I was already doing and just put them over there. So I had a bit of a greater role in kind of defining how content strategy was employed. And because I was the guy, like, you know, BC at the time, obviously that's changed a lot now, but at the time didn't have much of a YouTube profile. And so I was more of a contributor in that way. And so those two things are going to be much more associated with me as a consequence. However, like one of the things that I think, you know, BC did, which is really important, is one, he brought the boxing gravitas and the knowledge, which I've been learning from every day since. And also he understood how to navigate more of the sort of the corporate place. I was kind of a little bit more outsider. He was a little bit more insider. And, you know, some of those things aren't as visible to you on the outside, but they're very visible to me in ways which we've been able to problem solve in advance by virtue of some of his insights and experience in that way. And so did we bring the same things to MK? No, but we're equal contributors by virtue of what we brought in the way in which we brought it. It's just that we didn't bring exactly the same things. So I don't make a whole lot of it. So I did see this, but can you talk more about the comments made by TKO this week about possibly moving away from the traditional pay-per-view model once their rights deal with ESPN is up? I mean, they kind of hinted at it a little bit, and what they sort of really said, what they wanted to be flexible about it. That may not mean the entire removal of pay-per-view. It could mean, you know, there's a somewhat of a decline in pay-per-view, or, you buy bigger bundles, you buy 4 at a time, and then you can space those out. Or, you know, there's ways in which you can construct a product where it's not pay-per-view every month that you have to buy. And again, I realize some of you are going to pirate, but, you know, in theory, right, that's what's happening. They didn't really give enough of an indication. They kind of sort of hinted that there could be some new ways about thinking about things, which would be great. I think all of us would be in favor of something like that. But there wasn't enough specifics for me to really go on. Also, pay-per-view is still enough of a revenue driver. I would just have to see, like, imagine the UFC sold all of their pay-per-views to Netflix, where it's like they just sort of looked at what could we make on a per pay-per-view, or what would be a pay-per-view, a numbered event, 301, 302, 303, whatever. And we gave those to Netflix. What could we charge Netflix as a flat fee to get? And could there be ways to like structure more incentive on top of it? Maybe that's something that they end up doing. And that also has massive implications for how fighter pay works, because the highest end fighters make up that money based off of sort of a tier of escalating sales. You get $1 for everything above 200,000 to 3. You get $2 for everything from 300,000 to 5. You get $5 or $10 from 500,000 on up. You get $20 for every buy over $1 million. Like, what do you do in a pay structure that no longer has that tiered system? We don't really know. So I don't think that they're going to give up pay-per-view anytime soon. They might reduce it a little bit. They might change the way we get some of them. I do think that's possible. But the first order of business needs to be that they have to get out of business with ESPN Plus. I mean, what a fucking disaster. What a disaster. What a complete and total devastating piece of shit product. Just the absolute worst. Just complete garbage, if ever there was one. And, you know, again, I said on my video, if the UFC thought, like when they signed a deal in 2019, hey, this is the premier brand in sports, surely they'll have a great product. I sort of understand that, right? But now they don't have any excuse. Now they can look around and be like, dude, this product is shit. So whatever they end up doing, let's hope they figure that part out first. All right. Let's see what you guys got on the super chat. Again, under no obligation to contribute, but if you do, it's a big help for me. Love you guys. Thank you so much. All right. Let's see what we have. Take this off. Excuse me. All right. Here we go. Luke, give me 3 underrated rappers from any era to check out. My recommendation for you is Lloyd Banks from G Unit. Yeah, no, thank you. Big L. Big L would be one. You know what? As a pure rapper, his songs are a little sometimes goofy for me, but R.A. the Rugged Man. So Big L, you could go R.A. And then, I mean, I don't think he's underrated because critics really like him, but like to the average rap fan, dude, it's got to be MF Doom, right? Got to be. Oh, you know what? Big Noid. Big Noid. Not the best technical rapper, but like brought great energy to songs. He's got one with Master Ace. Master Ace is another one you could do. Yeah. I tend to prefer more New York rappers, but not exclusively. All right. T-Ball Paul says, hey, Luke, I recently sent out a direct message to both ESPN Plus and OJ Simpson. Care to guess who responded first? Well, OJ is dead, and ESPN Plus is a dead service. So I'll guess the estate of OJ. I don't know. I genuinely don't know the answer to that. That's amazing. That's absolutely fucking amazing. All right. Jared, just gifting out some memberships. Yeah, get on board, boys and girls. Get on board. Going to be a fun time. All right. Super Steroids says, do you see Olberg beating Hill with the fight now confirmed? I would love to see what the odds are. I think it's very doable for him. It's not like Hill is going to take him down aggressively. Could happen, but it seems unlikely. He's just going to kind of stand there with him. The question is really about whether Hill can pressure him and get inside of his range. And I think if that happens, then it's certainly his fight to lose. But Olberg is tricky. He's quick. You make a mistake against him, you overcommit, bad things can really happen. I think the longer a fight goes and if he gets tired, he becomes much more beatable. But because I feel like Jamal Hill's got good striking, but is a little bit potentially overcommitted to it rather than a more well-rounded game. Again, he's got very defensively good, takedown defense and ability to get up off the bottom, but he doesn't have like the next gear to just aggressively go for takedowns. For two different skills, obviously. So yeah, dude, Olberg's a real threat for sure. Steve asks, what's the most an MMA fighter can make on a regional MMA show for one night? I mean, it really depends on how regional. You can make several thousand. I don't think I've heard of much more than 10. I'm sure that it gets as high. It gets higher than that. Especially if you go to a place like Cage Warriors, you can get much higher than that. But still not huge amounts of money. But a lot of them are going to be 10,000 or less, and many of those are going to be 5,000 or less, and the many of those are going to be 1,000 or less. It's just not going to be a whole lot of money. Greg says, Luke, great interview with Corey yesterday. Thank you. Since he mentioned his praise for both Max and Jose Aldo, how would you see a fight against both of them going, either in their prime or currently? Boy, well, I think Max is a little bit too big. I just don't feel like Corey can hurt a guy that big. So I think Max ends up winning that one just because there's just going to be a big difference in who can dish it out and take it. Jose down at 35 is a different story. And also Corey being able to resort to the wrestling would be taken away. However, if Max was able to stop Jose with pressure behind a jab and feinting as well, circling a lot, I feel like Corey could really do a lot to occupy Jose and beat him inside of the kicking range, at his own boxing range, and have Jose acting too defensively before going. I do believe that that's a real thing he could do. In fact, I would favor him to win that one. But the Max one, he's just too big. I just think Max is too big. TJ says, I recently revisited the saddest film of my childhood, The Land Before Time. Holy fuck, that's a sad movie, bro. With my dino-loving 4-year-old son. Uh-oh. Anything from your childhood you've been able to revisit with your daughter? Yeah, dude, it's just like, it's so fucking weird for me, man. It's so weird. You guys can't appreciate this. There's no way to appreciate this, but like, dude, I moved from DC in what, like 1990. You know what I mean? So I was 9 or 10. I can't remember exactly anymore. I don't remember the full details a lot of it I've sort of repressed. But you know, in 1990, when you leave a place, I knew I'd come back in the summers and whatnot, but I was like, I'm leaving that place. Like, I don't know if I'm going to really ever, yeah, I'll be back, of course, to see my dad, but like, I'm not developing roots here. I'm not, you know, and this was, you know, a very different DC at the time. There was a lot of crime at the time, much, much worse than it is now. And then here I am, and you know, life is just funny. My dad had a wife from a foreign country. I've got one. My dad put me into DC public schools. I put my kid into DC public schools. And like, there's this weird kind of rhyming that I never intended and never thought was going to happen. And it's exactly what happened, you know? And so, you know, you're asking about something slightly different, but like, just in terms of these shared experiences, like, Jesus, man, I'm having them all. Let me ask you the quick question you got to. Anything from your childhood you've been able to revisit? Like, I'm in a weird way, I'm kind of revisiting it all the time. Like, we drive, when I take my daughter to gymnastics, I have to drive by the elementary school that I went to. And her gymnastics school is actually right by the middle school that I went to. You know what I mean? Like, or the other elementary school that I went to. It's just weird. It's just weird. It's really weird. But like, yeah, I try to show her everything that I can. In terms of things I grew up with, my wife does the same, and that happens all the time. Like Christmas carols from Colombia, my wife teaches her, and for me, you know, what's been like the one thing that I really liked from my childhood that I showed her? I mean, obviously the stuff that I really love, I can't show her because she's not ready for it yet. But you know, some of the Pinocchio was like a great one that she really loved. You know, it's just sort of the basics in that sense. But yeah, dude, it's like, I'm telling you, like, it's your life takes really weird paths that you just never thought possible, and then here you are. It's fucking crazy, man. It's fucking crazy. The Last Stand says, which fight week will feel bigger, Conor Chandler or Paul Tyson? Damn, that's a good question. I'm going to say Paul Tyson. Now, what I mean by that is, remember, you have to think of hardcore fans, or I should say fight fans, as a series of concentric circles. And at the center of the circle is like the hardest hardcore fan. And then there's like another layer where like they're pretty hardcore, but not as. And then as it dwindles, they get less and less, they become more and more casual. But the circle gets bigger and bigger and bigger because you've got much more people who fit into that circle versus the narrow one at the center. And so I feel like for the hardcore fight fans, which by the way, Conor pulls casual too, obviously, but you know, no one has hit me up that's among my friend circle about Conor's next fight. Like, I've heard nothing about it. I've gotten multiple questions about Jake Paul and Mike Tyson. Like, it's going to reach not so much into the hardcore fight fan experience, but much further into the casual fan experience. And it's terrible, but I do think it's going to be a significantly bigger event. Yeah. Jake, from Chicago, I'm guessing. A lot of sports radio shows can learn from TNT's Inside the NBA, straight shooting and entertaining. It will be sad when they eventually leave, which looks now inevitable that TNT is going to lose the rights after they got one more season. And it's going to be it, man. Inside the NBA is the best sports show on television. I don't think there's really a whole lot of debate about that. I will say that the Champions League show with Kate Abdo and Thierry Henry and Micah Richards and the whole gang, that's probably the second best one. Like, that's a very good one too. But Inside the NBA is something special. And you're right. You got big personalities that have a ton of credibility, who say funny things. They have great chemistry. They all kind of balance each other out. They give the people what they want. They don't hide from it. You get good analysis, dude. It's such a good show. Such a good show. Can't recommend it more. Ray says, Luke, do you see Usyk doing well in MMA? No. He's 37. Why would he do well in MMA? Athletic, strong, upper body, footwork. Also, Eastern Bloc boxers have wrestling and kickboxing backgrounds. Yeah, no, we're just imagining things. We're just imagining things. I did see a guy who got bitter at me on social media. He was like, you know, because I don't know if you guys saw this, you know, this new Mark Kerr movie that The Rock is making. Alexander Usyk is going to play Igor Vovchanchyn, ice cold Igor Vovchanchyn, who was like not only an MMA pioneer, but like a devastating puncher. But Chanchin was kind of known, he was like super stocky, but like diminutive. He wasn't a very tall guy. In fact, if you go and look up his fight against Paul Varlins, this giant fucking dude, and Igor just beats the living dog shit out of him. Igor was a beast, right? And Ukrainian. So like they've got Usyk playing like, you know, a Ukrainian pioneer in like high level MMA who obviously fought Mark Kerr. And I saw a guy who's on Twitter with me. He was bitter. He was like, "Oh, Usyk looks nothing like him," and I'm like, "Dude, this is the dumbest criticism imaginable." Yes, of course, some effort, and in certain cases, a lot of effort should be made to make a guy playing somebody else to look as much alike as possible. But they're obviously making a trade-off because A, people don't know who Igor Vovchanchyn is. You and I might know, but most people don't. And number two, the trade-off is that while Usyk may not look a lot like him, is much taller, blah, blah, blah. It's such a cool thing that the best heavyweight boxer of this era, and then the first one to unify since 1999, who also happens to be Ukrainian, is playing an MMA pioneer. Like, what a fantastic show of respect to Usyk that, you know, he can do this. What a fantastic show of respect to Vovchanchyn that they got, holy fucking shit, Usyk to play him. You know what I mean? Like, they're obviously making a trade-off between this isn't the most authentic body double we could pick, but there's a lot of upside in potentially picking him for any number of reasons. And oh, by the way, the average person who goes to see this movie will 1000% be none the wiser. You know, and there people were complaining about this, and I'm like, dude, this is not a very good criticism of this movie. In fact, it's one of the worst ones I've heard. Adam Rogers says there should be entertainment-based pay in the UFC. There is. Don't worry. EJ says, I saw a recent video from Phan from The Ultimate Fighter, and his speech was so deteriorated, it almost brought me to tears. Really? Damn. Will fans remain anti-fighter when this happens to the current gen, or is turnover too fast? Turnover's too fast. Like, compared to old people in boxing, I'm like young. When I say old people in boxing, dude, you go to boxing events, and yes, you go to fights these days, it's going to be a lot of younger people, but there's a lot of people in their 60s, 70s, even 80s, 50s, 60s, 70s. There's a ton of people in that range. There are not a lot of MMA fans in that range. They burn hot and then they go. They don't stick around. And so you're just getting another crop that comes along afterward. It's like, oh yeah, of course fighters don't deserve to be paid. And then you have to explain to that generation all the dumb shit that they think. And then they go away. And then a new generation comes. There's no other like senior fans either expressing a different set of preferences or fighting with other fans to, like, you know, police them or, you know, teach them. There's none of that. So they just come in fresh with all these like crazy ideas, and, you know, you get what you get. So no, I don't think that there will be any fixing that. Like, how many people who watched Phan in the UFC or the Ultimate Fighter in particular are still watching MMA? Not many. You know, it just doesn't exist. Dylan says, the UFC heavyweight title has been fought for 5 times since 2019. For comparison, the featherweight and bantamweight titles have been fought for 8 and 9 times. Thoughts on the importance of keeping a title active? It's important for like so many reasons, not least of which is healthy division turnover, star ascendancy, while, you know, an older one, a flame is sort of put out, right? There's this whole kind of transfer of power. Like, it's good for having fresh names that you can put at the top of a marquee. Like, any number of reasons why it's extremely important. And obviously, there are going to be moments of inactivity and difficulties for any kind of promoter to keep it in regular rotation. But holy shit. Like, the heavyweight division's a bit of a mess, and the light heavyweight division's also a bit of a mess. Although, you know, that's sort of getting corrected over time. But Jesus, like, it's really, really not great that you have a division this frozen in ice, and we can do things to fix it, and then we just don't. Kind of crazy. Tell BC to stop trying to end interviews early. He loves that. He loves that. All right, what happens first? Canelo Crawford, Jones Aspinall, Topuria McGregor. Damn, that's about right. Canelo Crawford probably 2/3. I think he's going to get it. Jones Aspinall 22%. Interesting. All right, Philosophu says, I feel like Topuria is going to piece up Max worse than Volk did in their third fight. Am I delusional? He certainly, I'll say this. He hits a lot harder and with significantly more detrimental effect, right? Even if Max wins, it's hard for me to see how that's not a very bloody, difficult fight for him, right? Whether or not it bears resemblance to the third Volkanovski fight, I mean, I don't know, but I just think is it fair to say as a striker, Topuria is more dangerous than Volkanovski? I feel like that's a very fair thing to say. And then you have to ask yourself, like, well, of course, how are they going to match up? And Volkanovski was able to kind of like, repeatedly take a swing at the axe and score. Topuria is a little bit less that way, but just is able to do significant. I mean, look at the faces of the people after they fight Topuria, dude. They get fucked up. I suspect that Max will take, even if he wins, he's going to take some serious damage in that one. The Idaho Skatesman says, I like big butts and I cannot lie. Yeah, join the fucking club, guy. Who doesn't like a big fat ass? Jesus. All right, Michael says, you and Dan Hardy had a great dynamic recently. Excellent info and solid back and forth. Any chance of that becoming a more regular feature? Nothing on my end. I mean, one never knows. I always appreciate talking to Dan. I always learn a lot talking to Dan, and his wisdom is legitimate. And I'm sure I hopefully will have many more conversations with him in the future. But I don't have anything like formal to announce or that ever been talked about, quite frankly. RM says, do you think the Ultimate Fighter can come back? No. Message to RM. The answer is I'm getting word here. I'm getting word from the president. Yeah, the answer is fuck no. Yeah, no. UFC will have many, 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 many successes. You could change the Ultimate Fighter and then just still call the Ultimate Fighter, and now it's some unrecognizable version of itself. And then you could say, oh, well, we resurrected it. You could do that. And you even kind of hinted at that a little bit, right? If they keep... I think people would watch if they keep the original format of the show. So they have largely kept that, and people don't watch. I don't agree with that at all. No. Okay, Lee says, now that the dust has settled and MK is back once a week, did we take MK on Showtime CBS for granted? I don't know. Did you? That's hard for me to answer for you. I would say... Dude, when I signed that deal in 2019 and then ultimately the CBS deal in August of 2020, did any of us have a fucking idea that Showtime would be shut down? Showtime Sports would be shut down in 3 years, and that Paramount, CBS essentially, would just basically, not entirely, but basically get out of the combat sports business? Like, if you just looked at our numbers compared to some of CBS's biggest podcasts, some of them did more downloads, but we fucking smoked everybody on YouTube. Like, we were absolutely just crushing people. And we didn't have seasons. Like, their fantasy football was a big one, but like, it's just for fantasy football or just for regular football season. So we didn't have that problem. Like, I keep telling you, like, we had a meeting, like we that was a profitable, successful venture, but like, we just didn't know all of that shit was going to come undone. Now, I know everyone, I can't believe that there are people who think that like what me and BC wanted to do was just like take what people had, rip it from them, reduce it in size, not change anything about it, kick our feet up, and then say eat shit. Like that's what our plan is, rather than us fighting for our fucking lives out here, which is all we've been doing. It may not look like that on the outside, but motherfucker, trust me. That is not you, sir, but like the proverbial MFer out there. Like, we are dude, I mean, just the text thread alone I had today with BC about some of the shit we're working through. It's so much harder than you can imagine. It's so much fucking harder. So what I can say is, I don't know if anyone else took it for granted. I never took it for granted. But I will say that, like, if I do have a twinge of regret or longing, it's that 2 years into that deal, I had kind of had talked to, like, you know, one of our major bosses, and I was like, you know, when this deal is up in a year, I'm looking to renegotiate, and I feel like we could get serious budget and big money because, like I told you guys before, like, all the metrics they laid out for us, like, we beat them all. We beat them all, you know. And so I thought, dude, I said this before, I thought in that August or June, July, heading into the August contract renegotiations, you know, we were set up for like a massive renewal based on all the success we had. But then the entire parent company just wanted to get out of the business. And so as good as it was for the podcast, if they're just not in the combat sports business anymore, a little old podcast isn't going to change that. And so it all just came undone. I honestly think that was my window to make really big money in the business. And right when we were ready to do it, the whole shit came apart. If you guys don't think I haven't lost sleep over that, I don't know what to tell you, man. That was fuck me, dude. That was so bad. That was so bad. And honestly, if I didn't have this YouTube channel, would I even be in the business anymore? Like, what would I do? Who would I go to? All the jobs, I've told you guys this, like all the jobs that we begged every media outlet to create when UFC was getting hotter and hotter in 06, 07, 08, 09, 2010 and beyond. So many of those are going away. And dude, they're not done going away. Like, there's a bunch that still exist that are 1000% going away. You know, so like, I do believe that 3 days a week was probably too much. I think that 2 days a week is going to be better. I do think we are going to get to 2 days a week. I can't declare that to you, but that is my belief. But the part that just fucking eats at me every night is that, like, a year out from renegotiation, like, every indication was that MK was going to get massively renewed, that the budget was going to be fucking sick, that, you know, I was going to make the biggest paychecks of my life. Like, everything was set up that way. And then forces beyond my control blew up the industry. What can you do? What the fuck can you do? It was, golly, I can't even tell you how many sleepless nights I had. I'm better now. I'm better now, but I had a lot of sleepless nights over that, you know. So you can cry about it, but it's not going to fix anything, you know. So, but don't worry, like, you guys are wanting more MK, and you want MK to do more things. Like, I can't tell you anything other than what I'm allowed to, but believe me when I fucking tell you that every single day Brian and I are doing everything possible to get this to 2 days a week, and more than that, to go on trips, blah blah blah, like, you name it, you know. I don't think folks even understand. If you knew the story of how we even got the current deal that we're on, I think you would be amazed. I think you would be amazed that even that was, you know, we didn't pat ourselves on the back for it, but when I tell you that that was not easy, Jesus, yeah, man, it was a strange time. It was a strange time. Hot take, but feel like Inoue is getting underrated. Hella. How is Usyk decisioning Fury, putting him over Inoue, who's literally ripping people apart? Okay, he's not literally ripping people apart. Like, he's not literally ripping them. I think the argument would be partly recency. Like, these guys are all just neck and neck, so whoever does it the most recent is sort of going to ascend. I do think that's part of it. Like, the fact that Bud hasn't fought since July definitely plays a role in him not getting number one in certain people's lists. I think the idea would be that, first of all, Usyk didn't get knocked down. Inoue did. Obviously, I know he finished him off. I read in his last fight. I get that. That was the first time he's been knocked down. I also get that. I think the argument might be that, like, if you just look at the size disparity, and what a guy has to do against like significantly bigger opponents. Certainly at 122, Inoue is, you know, fighting people above what would consider to be his normal weight class. And he could go to 126. Who even knows 130? But I think that would be the biggest issue. David says, hey, Luke, you mentioned that one reason for taking down some of your videos is due to a lack of traffic and it could be affecting your channel overall. Could YouTube Shorts be a good alternative for that? I think it's actually the opposite problem. My understanding is you can fuck with your algorithm doing that. If you put up a bunch of shorts, I don't think it's like if you put up one short once in a while, it's going to do anything bad for you. But my understanding is you can mess with your algorithm by putting up a bunch of shorts. Now YouTube's like, oh, we're going to focus on those and not the long form content. And you can generate a ton of subscriptions using YouTube Shorts, but it's almost impossible to make money. All the money is in content that is normal, like this, so to speak. All right. Crackman says, what percentage of success depends on the capital of a combat athlete for his camp and team, as they can range from totally broke to 1 milli Islam? So this is a complex argument. Obviously, an elite world-class professional needs to have some elite world-class resources. And by that, I typically mean in the form of assistants, training partners, coaches, to an extent facilities, but that's, I'm going to say, the least important of them with some exception. But mostly in the form of like a team that you build around you, a nutritionist potentially, somebody who helps you with your weight cut, or, you know, like this guy, the fight dietitian, who the guy out of Australia that like Izzy uses and Volk uses, who both manages their weight, what they eat, what they weigh, what they eat on a weigh-in day, what they eat post weigh-in, how to manage their cut, and he does it all because he got advanced degrees from university, and like he can really get it down in a very super scientific way, and like the results of his athletes speak for themselves. Like that is like that, a world-class fighter, like a true world-class fighter, you need somebody like that. But in terms of like a gym resource, you know, Fedor was winning under Spartan conditions, and even now sometimes Spartan conditions can still really deliver to you everything you could possibly need and then some. Like you don't need a fancy gym to be a world-class fighter. You go to like some of these Brooklyn and, you know, Detroit gyms and whatnot, like they smell like shit. They're all wild card. Like you go to some of these hollowed institutions, Church Street, Wild Card, they don't look all that impressive. They don't necessarily need to be, but the instruction and the structured time around you, those things are critically important. And of course, there can be exceptions too. Hey, I want to fly in this coach and put him up, and I've got a bunch of money, and that's very expensive. Canelo does spend a lot of money on his camp because he wants to be at altitude, and, you know, he wants to have a big team around him and blah, blah, blah. You know, I'm not suggesting that there can't be ways in which an expensive camp is more beneficial, but for the most part, what you're paying for are the human resource element around you. And that's where, you know, how much success depends on it. But the other part is, if you live in a country that has a state-sponsored program around a combative sport, either boxing or wrestling or something, where they find kids in the school system, early age, like kindergarten age, begin to train them, recruit out the best ones, and then they've got this whole like taxpayer, government-funded, whatever system all the way through ages 18 to 22, whatever, every step along the way, and they're you know, essentially finding and developing the very best athletic talent and putting them through the very best that a state program can do. That is going to yield significant returns in an MMA context, in terms of like, you know, how much does capital of the combat athlete? Well, that's not so much the combat athlete themselves, but the state from which they come from could have a dramatic effect on what kind of training and preparation they have before they even enter into an MMA career. That also plays a role too. PFL just cut Mousasi. Is this breaking news? They're probably broke also. Yeah, they said he was too expensive, and I'm like, I don't think that's the problem. Dana has said that Jones versus Miocic is the fight, quote, fans want to see, end quote, at heavyweight. Do you think this is true? Stipe's got a higher Q rating than Tom Aspinall, so it probably does a little bit better at the box office even now still. But that, you know, certainly among hardcore fans, that's not true. Among hardcore-ish, older-ish, casual-ish fans, and that sort of group, which is a big group, a little bit more Stipe for sure. MK all day, Saul. Yes, sir. Love you. Not Dick says, am I weird to think that Bilal is going to walk through Leon? Walk through is a big claim. I know Leon largely shut down Kamaru, but that was post KO. Okay. Perfect against Colby, but Colby was not that good. Yeah. I mean, listen, I'm not going to sleep on Bilal's chances, but he's over the age of 35, which we know that 170 is a bit of a tweener when it comes to that stat. And as I said, who knows when they're fighting at 4 a.m. what the fuck's going to happen. It's just that the thing that I said before that that Bilal is up against is that he has to do it against a guy who had to train for Colby, even if Colby didn't show up, and then train 2 times or 3 times for Usman, obviously to get the results that he got in the end. Like, and he's still under 35. Like, he's at a point now where he's probably the peak of his powers with the exact kind of prep he would need for this particular opponent. So I'm not going to sleep on Bilal at all, but it is an uphill climb. Do you think conversation around fighter pay will return when new MMA fans realize that most of their favorites retire without generational wealth? No. Not even a little bit. I don't think that most of them are aware. Most of them don't care. And most of them won't be here long enough to ever connect the dots. And also, a lot of them just want to see these fuckers bleed. Not so much the hardcore fans, but they don't last very long either. It's really the casual ones. And again, they come and they go. Like, no. Dude, nothing is going to fix anything until the fighters find a way themselves to make the rule of law change UFC business practices. That is fucking it. That is it. And they manifestly wish to do nothing. So unless some fighters, like the ones that did the lawsuit, like of their own, try to just force this, it will always just be what it is. Like, there is no remedy to it. Something has to make the UFC change their business practice. Or, listen, maybe the Department of Justice sues them for monopoly practices. I don't know, but short of something like that. Here we are. Greg says, Luke, sorry if you've answered this in some capacity before, but how would you have seen Fedor versus Brock? I think Brock would have been subbed out. I do believe that at the time in which they would have fought. I do believe that. Lazybed says, I know you were busy being a child scholar when you were growing up, but which NBA star did young Luke choose to emulate when playing driveway basketball as a kid in honor of conference finals? I mean, same. I had the Michael Jordan baseball card back then. So obviously everyone played MJ, but I was always a big guy. So, I mean, I've been this tall since I was 14. So, on the college side, it'd be Leitner. On the pro side, it would be Olajuwon or something. I mean, but what the fuck? I mean, can't compare my game in the driveway to Hakeem Olajuwon. I'm just saying, like, who did I like? Oh, big guy. Let's do big guy shit. That kind of thing. How many buy fights do you think Conor's new deal lasts? You think he would sign a long-term deal that could prevent boxing? He might have a deal that could prevent boxing, but then they could do the thing they're doing with Jorge, where they can just sort of grant him permission to go. I suspect he's at least got a couple more, if not a few more. The fact that he wants 3 fights this year kind of tells you what he might have left, PFL and Bellator just released Gegard Mousasi. Okay, good. They should. They can't use him. I don't say that like, oh, let's stick it to Mousasi. That's not what I mean. But, like, they can't. If you can't use him, then why the fuck is he on roster? And by the way, they killed a year of his career before they figured this out, by the way. Great job. Amazing. Big update per IG. There we go. PFL has released Mousasi from his contract. Also, what do you think it would take for UFC to open an atomweight division? Ooh. So I actually have talked to matchmakers about this before, and the answer is you need to have at least 20 plus you could sign right away. And I don't think that they want to do that right now, or maybe ever. It would take even more events for them to want to get there. Not ever, but it would. They don't want to do that right now. I feel pretty strongly about that. What are your thoughts on the Jones being in the closet allegations and the person who exposed him? Some of the evidence seems legit. I have to tell you, what Jon Jones is doing with his genitals and with whom, I could not possibly give a fuck less about. And I could not possibly imagine spending 3 seconds worrying about something like that. If that gets you through your day, it's a free country, but who fucking cares is the way I would put it. Have you ever met or seen Al Heyman in real life? No. Seems like this guy's a leprechaun. I don't know what that means. Barely any videos of him online. That's true. And if there are people are secretly recording him, I don't think he goes to events hardly at all. I don't think he goes. Should PFL have bought Fight Circus instead? Well, that wouldn't be a path to profitability either, unfortunately. True or false? Conor McGregor stops Michael Chandler. True. Canelo ends up fighting Terence Crawford in September. See, that one, I don't know. No, false, because Bud is fighting in August, so that couldn't be. The PFL folds sometime in the next 3 years. I'll say this. If you changed it to being sold, I would say true. But folds, they can probably hang on for a little while longer, so I'll say false. Boston Celtics will win their 18th NBA championship. Man. I hate Dallas, but then Luka Doncic, who played for Real Madrid, is like killing them there. So I'm kind of hoping they win. I'll say true. Fuck it. I'll say true. Chris Hoover says, how spoiled are we to get Diamond fight twice in 5 months? Oh, you mean Poirier? Yeah, it's great. He will be in Newark. Odds of getting him on RSD? No, pretty low. I don't think we could even arrange something like that. Check out Mac Dre. Okay, I don't know who that is, but all right. Who has the better chance? Ryan Garcia beating Sean O'Malley in MMA or Sean beating Ryan in boxing? Garcia could get lucky in MMA, but I don't think Sean's going to get that lucky in boxing. Grappling advantage, Evloev or Sterling? Ooh, different grappling. Different grappling. I'd say Sterling is a little bit more versatile, but Evloev a little bit more of a controller. Certainly on top, a little more physically dominant, whereas Sterling is more positionally dominant. Also physical, but not quite to the same degree. Light heavyweight seems to be for the taking by a well-rounded 205er, since it's mostly strikers right now with some submission skills. A 205 Aspinall would reign for probably so. Yeah, you're right. If you got decent two-way offense as a light heavyweight, you can go pretty far. But even then, some of those fuckers can't get it together. Is there an effective technique that fighters refuse to do because it looks stupid but is otherwise effective, a la underhanded free throw in basketball? Dude, great question. Certainly the embarrassment of some of the high amplitude ones they don't want to get caught with, that deters them a little bit. Honestly, I think that they mostly want to go with what is most effective. I mean, putting on a banana split on someone, you've seen it a couple times in MMA. It's not a huge thing, but like an underhanded free throw. But like, isn't that an effective way to do it? So like, what effective technique are they abandoning because it looks stupid? I'm not sure what the answer is on that one. Would you consider interviewing Paulie Malignaggi? Sure, I love Paulie. Despite his Bronze Age political views, he's by far the most insightful boxing analyst around. I will tell you, Chris Algieri, also very, very insightful and a good dude. So I will happily get their boxing opinions for sure. Crackman says, if you had to only keep all combat sports weight classes up or down of a 60 pounds, oh, dude, 160 and down, like you can get rid of the rest of this shit. That's an easy call. Don't sleep on Lloyd Banks, Dustin says. Check out his solo mixtapes when he distanced himself from G Unit. He might be fine. I don't know. I'm not going to listen though. Top Boy Glee says, hey Luke, who's the statue you've got on the shelf up there with the red shirt, blue jeans? This one? I think it's an MC or a comedian. It is Sean Price. It is Sean Price. It's the here. Let's see if I can find it. Let's see. Oh no, this is going to have sound. I don't want that. Let's try this one. Do they have it here? They don't have it on this one. Let's see. Images. Maybe they got it on images. Yeah, it's this one. This is not my image. This is just Google image. Oh, for fuck's sake. It's another goddamn TikTok video. Let's see. Hold on. Here. I'll just put this up so you can see it very quickly. It's this one. And what you can do is you can actually take off the head and you can get one that looks like this, like Gray Hulk, and you can put the Thanos arm or you can put a different kind of hulking out arm. He used to call himself the Gray Hulk. And there's a gorilla there, and each one has its own number underneath the pavement here. And so I changed out the arm and the head to get that one. So yeah, from an artist by the name of Scartocchio. He just 3D printed it. Thanks for everything, Luke B and BC2. Yeah, thanks, dude. Appreciate it. After enjoying your surly demeanor for years, Luke Thomas hates everything, anyone. I wasn't sold on you and BC, but will happily admit I was dead wrong. Wishing you all success. Yeah, thanks, dude. Again, I never make a good first impression on anyone, ever. Never works. But sometimes I'm able to win some people back. Not every time, but sometimes. Any plans for a live show for the Newark card? We're definitely going to be, so I haven't told you guys this. We're going to, there's no MK on Monday because it's Memorial Day and the studios are closed. Nothing we can do. But we're going to have a show on that Friday, the day before, in New York, and we're going to have a very special in-studio guest, a guest that MK fans have specifically requested many, 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 many times. So very much looking forward to that. Why do you hate Dallas? It's got some cool parts, like any city does. I don't like the culture there. I don't like old Texas money. I don't like Texas that much. There's some parts of it, Texas, that are cool. Some parts are not that great. But it just seems to me like it's very cliquey as a city. It's very hard to get around. Everything is very spread out. Yeah, it's not my favorite. Do you think if Michel Pereira gives up showboating and focused more on striking, he'd be more of a contender in the weight class? A little bit, but not as much as you might imagine. I think that part of doing unorthodox, crazy-ass shit is actually what elevates him in the end, to a degree anyway. A fight between Topuria and Pereira would be just a dance-off. No, it would be Topuria going to the land of wind and ghosts. Oh, you mean Michel Pereira? Oh, yeah, you might get a little bit of that. Well, they also did get that, and you saw what happened. All right, Elevate Kombucha says, hey, Luke, thanks for being awesome. Hey, I want your 2 cents on the Sphere event, specifically what you think the date will be. Well, it's 306, is it not? What's the date for 306? Do we have that date locked in yet? So that is supposed to be September 14th, which is, by the way, did you guys see this? So that's going to be, that is Mexican Independence Day. And you might be asking, well, independence from whom? And they're going to have a potential Spaniard headlining it. I'm like, I know this is not typically the sport where people care about getting things right like this, but I have to tell you that can you imagine like a boxing promoter trying to do that, having like a Hawaiian versus a Spanish dude fight on Mexican independent? I mean, you would, they just would not do that. They just would not do that. But, I realize that no one gives a shit about that stuff in MMA, even though it's fucking hilarious. All right, boys and girls. Hey, thank you so much for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. I know we had the one yesterday and the one today, all that good stuff. Hey, just a reminder. You can become a member, contribute to this on the paid portion for free. You get the extra videos that nobody else gets. You get tons of free stuff, or, cool, not free, but things that associate with the purchase. So thank you for everyone who has. We really appreciate you. There will be some content the next few days. Thank you guys for picking up on what we've done so far. More next week. Tons of fun stuff. And thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it. So we're out of here. I'm going to go to the front yard and go lift some weights. So I will see you guys a little bit later. And until then, stay frosty.